So for those people who don't know what an incel is, first of all, describe it, explain it, and then we'll go on to your wonderful documentary that you've made about it. So what is an incel?
So incels is a short term for involuntary celibate, and they're usually men, usually young men, not always, who identify as not being able to have a romantic or sexual partner despite wanting one. So they're not people who don't want to have a romantic relationship. They do. They just believe for whatever reasons, and they have multiple different reasons as to why, that's an opportunity that's not afforded to them.
Right.
So what's happened then is it's become, usually online, quite a misogynistic group who congregate and share very harmful ideologies and kind of egg each other on to be more and more misogynistic is what we tend to see.
So at what point do they decide that it's not going to work out for them? Like, I mean, is there a particular age they are, or, have they tried everything and then realised that, romance or love isn't for me?
I think it's a big mix. And I would say that too on the scale of how extreme they are. There are guys on the lower end who just believe some of this ideology but aren't very toxic about it. And then there is the very extreme end, which is very dangerous. And we've also seen, real world attacks around the world where violence has happened in real life by incels. So it is something to take seriously, but they're not all on that level.
Okay.
I think what tends to happen for a lot of them, particularly the guys I spoke to in the documentary, is they feel a sense of social isolation in general, usually starting in their teenage years. And what tends to happen is the life experiences that other young men are having, whether it's, your first kiss or getting your first girlfriend or going to college and meeting someone or whatever it is, those things don't happen. And resentment builds up over time. You're looking for an answer as to why. They find a lot of rhetoric they get is really patronizing, that, just put yourself out there, or, just get on Tinder. And they're like, that's not true though, because when they do, in fairness, they don't match and they don't get any dates. So they tend to spend more and more time online, and then they come across this kind of rhetoric. Sometimes when you're not even looking for it, like I spoke to a young teen, which I found very scary. He says he gets bombarded with this stuff, whether you're looking for it or not, through the algorithm. Once you read a bit of it, you just get more and more and more and more.
Right.
And you kind of fall down the rabbit hole. And then they find themselves on the incel forums, which are specific places only for incels that they run themselves. And that's where you get the really, really toxic stuff. But I think it starts with probably more watered down content on social media, that then you fall into a gradual rabbit hole into the really dark stuff.
You're kind of describing what would have been previously been, maybe described as a loner, a sort of a guy sitting in his room, doesn't have much luck with women and goes online and sort of nowadays goes online. Of course, previously they wouldn't have had that facility to go and reach out and find similar people.
100%. Like William Costello, who's a researcher, an Irish guy from Sligo who researches incels, he was saying, like, in his view, we've kind of always had incels, sort of.
Yeah.
Young men who, for whatever reason, can't find a romantic partner. And, maybe they were Vikings sent off to war. Maybe they became monks or something. I'm not saying every monk.
Yeah.
But just this idea that there were places for these young men, perhaps.
Yeah.
And they didn't congregate as a group where this is what defined them. Whereas now, they're congregating online, and this part of themselves is the bit that they're sort of identifying with.
And so when did this sort of community as such, this online community of them, emerge?
I think it's been around for a long time, like the early 2000s definitely, but I think 2014, if I'm not wrong, was when Elliot Rodger had a mass shooting over in California, and that sort of brought it to the real public consciousness, I think, that incels were this group. Before that, it was very, very fringe.
So what happened then?
So Elliot, he actually uploaded multiple very chilling videos to YouTube before his rampage, sort of outlining his grievances with the world, his grievances with women, and that he was going to exact revenge, which he unfortunately did, and he shot multiple people in California before also killing himself. And it kind of shocked, I suppose, the world because it was so public in the way he'd shared his views. And he also published an incel manifesto that he put out afterwards, which was sort of his whole worldview. And unfortunately,
so does he sort of become the godfather nearly of it then?
For some of them, yeah. Like you'd even see on the forums, anytime the letters E or would come together in a word, they'd capitalize it, sort of in some sort of weird reverence to him. So he's for many incels a bit of a hero figure.
Quite articulate though at the same time, while it's really dark stuff, and he goes on to kill and murder before he turns the gun on himself. But he's articulate. He's able to explain just how he's feeling.
Yeah, and actually that just reminded me too, what I found and struck me when I was on the forums really quite bizarre was they use loads of like academic research and like things that feel sort of legit to back up their beliefs that are slightly though warped. Like they'll use research found from research done on Tinder, for example, that, and I don't have the research correct exactly, but they, you know, 80% of women swipe only on the top 20% of men, attractiveness-wise. And this will be published in some sort of thing that looks like an academic study and then used in a very articulate way to be like, see, women are only interested in, you know, men of a certain category and not the rest of us. And that proves our worldview. But what they don't want, and from what I've seen, is anything that disproves their worldview. Anything like that is shut out and banned and kicked out of the forums. They don't want to hear it.
So you're talking about these forums. So these are they on Telegram?
There are all kinds of places.
Right.
They are on Telegram, they're on Discord, and then they also have a platform that I wouldn't name just because I don't want to give it the prominence, but they have a specific platform online they use that they log into.
Right. And is this the one that you describe in the documentary that they actually have to give their home IP address?
Yeah.
So it's like a private club, but whoever's running this actually doesn't want randomers going out using, you know, cafe IP websites, or sorry, internet cafes. They want to know who they're dealing with.
Yep, well, and they have a big fear of the media. They really don't want to let any media sources in.
Right.
They very rarely speak to the media. So that's another way of sort of making sure this group is closed and only people who are in it are people who want to be part of that community.
But it would also be a way, it feels a bit culty to me. Yeah. It would be a way of, if they know exactly who you are and where you are, and you're sort of, you know, unleashing this very dark thought process, they have you.
Yep.
So it's difficult to come back out of it then?
Mm-hmm. I think it also gives them I'm not speaking for them, but I'd imagine gives them a sense of safety within those groups, that everyone is on the same level, everyone knows who everyone is. So because they share some very dark, very explicit, graphic things on there. So I suppose it's a form of protection too, that they know who you are, should you do anything with that content.
And how many people would be on this sort of forum?
It could be over 20,000 people.
All over the world?
Yeah.
Right, okay. And English speaking, presumably?
Yeah, mostly, yeah.
So is that the forum you infiltrated, or did you attempt to infiltrate that forum?
No, I was in multiple different places. I was on Telegram and Discord too, but I suppose most of the more shocking stuff was on that one major platform, yeah.
Yeah. And when you say shocking stuff, did you go on yourself as, did you go undercover as such, or did you?
I went in as an incel. And yeah, the things I read and saw were really horrifying. Videos of women being murdered, rape videos. Some of the content would sort of lean towards things that are being alluded to pedophilia. A lot of it, though, is classed as some kind of weird, twisted humor. So it's hard to sometimes figure out the risk. I mean, obviously the rape videos and the murder videos are horrific, but they tend to try and present it as humor in a very strange way.
Right.
And then just weird posts that are really long, again, almost presented in kind of very articulate in black and white and almost academic way of like why rape should be legalized. This is very graphic stuff, but why a young female's eyes should be removed at birth so that they can't see men, then they couldn't be based on looks, and that would solve the incel problem. But that would be written in quite explicit detail. You know, calls for public hanging of women, just unbelievably extreme things that you really couldn't have imagined. And
like, while on this forum, can you sort of chat to one person? Can you sort of also kind of take it outside that and start chatting to one another? Is it a place where they make friends?
Yep, it is a place where you make friends. You can't have direct like messaging if that's what you mean. Yeah. But you can post and then people will respond and you respond and so on. Kind of like Reddit, I suppose.
Okay, yeah.
With that, that's sort of how it works there. But then on the apps like Telegram or Discord and those groups, yeah, you can sort of go into a separate little private chat if you want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they can either do that or they could be meeting up.
We don't. I mean, I don't know, but yeah, in theory, yeah.
In theory,
yeah. They tend not to.
Okay. Yeah. So what they're putting up is very, anti-woman. So the point of the incel is that they cannot get a woman. Mm-hmm. They believe that women are only looking for good-looking men over 6 foot. Yeah. And
wealthy men as well.
Wealthy men, okay. And that they aren't those things, so therefore they'll never be chosen, ever. But it's a lot of that is their, well, obviously it is their insecurity as opposed to anything else. Is there any recognition of that from them?
No, because they believe that their worldview generally would tend to be that they've lost the genetic lottery. This is the way the world is set up. This is their black pill thinking, which links to all that sort of conspiratorial thinking with the red pill and the matrix and all those things. But they have the black pill.
Explain that actually, just for those who don't.
So from the movie The Matrix, the red pill, where you take it and you're sort of opened up to the realities of the world that everyone else is asleep to. The black pill is that the world is set up in this way where looks are very important in mating. And if you don't reach that criteria, there's nothing you can do. That's just how it is. And the thing is, many of the guys I spoke to said there's a weird sense of comfort in that, because then it's not your fault.
Right.
There's nothing you could do. This is how the world is. Mm-hmm. And then you just lash out against it.
Okay. But in other words, they are people who probably are sort of social misfits, which is not what they want. Obviously, it's what they feel. And that's why they have kind of come together in this sort of culture, nearly this community.
Yeah.
Because they probably are social misfits and yet they're feeling that way and they're getting together and with like-minded sort of aggression back against it's the classic school shooter stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, a lot of the feelings and the thinking and the rhetoric would be present in a lot of research from school shooters is a similar category. I think, though, it's important to say we sometimes have an idea of who these types of guys are. And I don't think from the guys I spoke to that night might necessarily be true. Like,
yeah, you were saying you were quite shocked because they were kind of like quite normal.
Yeah, and chatty enough, and like you could have a bit of a laugh, and
they could present themselves socially without it being a problem.
Holding down jobs, engaging sort of in the world in a way, and I think again it's that thing I came back to of like it's a scale. So I think the problem is that there could be guys who maybe really aren't social misfits completely, but I mean, everyone has awkward years as a teen in particular. Yeah. If this is where you're going to find a sense of comfort or an explanation to your situation, I think that's a real worry for young people. They could get pulled into this, whereas necessarily going back in the past, they mightn't have gone down that road at all. You know?
And as we said at the beginning, it's kind of like when you get there, it's a finality because it's an acceptance that you're never going to find romance, love, you're never going to be attractive. So you're there, you're in this grouping. In many cases, you're using your home IP address. They know who you are. You've probably said things that you don't want to be publicised. And they're very discouraging should anybody sort of waver towards maybe trying a relationship or trying to find a woman.
Yeah, you'd see posts where somebody put up a post on the forum about they finally got a date and bam, that user has been banned from the forum. They don't want to know. Is
there an attack kind of a mentality with them? Do they attack the individual?
They can do, yeah. There also are, what I found really depressing was, and especially with young boys, even as young as 12, putting up pictures of themselves to be rated for looks. And then these guys would absolutely tear them to shreds. And like they really would look grand, like really normal. But you'd swear reading the comments they were some kind of Shrek. Like it's just so extreme. So they're really pulling each other down rather than giving themselves any sense of self-confidence. But I even saw a post about an incel who maybe went on to get married or something. But then the idea there would change again, where it's actually, right, you've married Stacey, which is what they call women now, but in the long term, you're not a Chad, which is the alpha male. So eventually she'll leave you. She'll take all your money. She'll go off with a Chad and you'll be left high and dry. So they still will play into the worldview no matter what way you spin it nearly.
Like, is there a leadership? Is there a hierarchical grouping within these? I mean, within these chat forums, it's difficult because everybody is a nobody as such. Yeah. You're just out there with probably a tagline. But can you see some sort of leadership or some sort of central ruling position in it?
Well, there's the people who I suppose run the forums, so they're quite up the top. Not really, like you say, it's quite open.
Did you get any sense of who they are or where they might be or anything?
You never know who they are. It's very hidden and secretive. But what you would see though is the more gross usually and the more disgusting their content would be on the forums, the more interaction it would get. And I think they would get a bit of infamy in the group. And that tends to be what lifts you up as like a great incel, is the sort of more gross and disgusting and misogynistic you can be. So that's sort of how you get social currency in the group.
Now, we talked about Elliot Roger, but closer to home in the UK, Jake Davison.
Yeah.
Tell us what happened with him. And he identified as an incel.
Yeah, and he, again, similar to Elliot, put up multiple quite chilling videos on YouTube leading up to his attack, where he would vent all kinds of grievances against the world and women. And he went on to, I think at the time anyway, it was the biggest mass shooting in the UK in over a decade. Yeah, so that was quite a
What age was
event. Well, I'm not sure off the top of my head exactly what age he was, but he's early 20s.
Right, so young, isn't it?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I mean, to have a confirmed view of the world. So what drew you to it, to the whole story of it and to investigating it?
I think I was interested I was very aware of it as an online global thing and something that I associated probably more with America. So I was just interested to know, like, is it something that's affecting Ireland? And I spoke to some young teenagers, and what struck me is really interesting. When I was making the documentary, anyone probably over roughly the age of 35 often didn't know what an incel was or had never heard the term. Anyone of a secondary school age that I spoke to knows exactly what it is. It's used as a sort of insult, like stop being such an incel.
Right.
It's very common knowledge, and they engage with a lot of this content, whether or not directly, but they see it a lot. So I suppose I just wanted to explore it more and see, are there that many Irish guys? And even then, when I spoke to William Costello, like, I was shocked that in his master's research, 10% of the guys who took part were Irish. You know, on the forums, I saw loads of Irish guys, and I kind of thought I wouldn't.
And so you were going on to this sort of global forum. How did you manage to speak to some Irish guys through that?
It was really hard. It was really hard to get guys to talk. They're very, very nervous. I think being a young man myself helped. Like, one of the guys told me that he was trying to work out for ages, was I a man or a woman? And if I was a woman, he wouldn't have spoken to me because he would have assumed I'm just...
And you're undercover, or are you coming at it as yourself, Alan?
I'm undercover kind of in the broad outreach.
Yes.
Because, you know, some of them are very extreme. But when there's a bit of engagement, I would
You're telling them
who I am.
and that you're just interested in their views and whatever, yeah.
But it took a really long time. Like, some of them, multiple attempts to talk to them. Some of them would only talk via text. They'd never show me their face. It was very difficult, but there's just ways you could tell if someone's Irish.
Did they give you any sort of an indication, their background, or what sort of, you know, drove them to this belief in themselves?
Well, I spoke to one guy who we call Paul in it. That's not his real name, but he sort of explained to me how he's from a small town in Ireland. GAA was the big thing there. You know, if you wanted to be in the in-group, you sort of were a GAA lad, and if you weren't, you were lower down the social totem pole. And that's where he sort of felt that first sense of alienation and a difficulty to connect. He thought he'd go to college and things would get better. That didn't really happen for him. But, you know, he went to house parties. He engaged in the world. Just has looked back now and assessed himself as there's just something wrong in him that he can't see that makes it impossible for him to kind of, he called it close the deal, sort of cross over into something more romantic or sexual. He just thinks it's beyond him. And then that's where he was already into gaming. And I'm not saying, because often incels get really stuck with gaming, and I don't think they all are, but there are a lot of them who do engage in gaming. And you just come across that kind of content, and then he gradually fell into it.
I suppose it is a lonely sort of escapism.
And it's very male-dominated, stereotypically, as well.
Yeah, it's not the most sociable thing, although I know that they will play, you know, online with one another and all the rest of it. But so he's just felt isolated. He didn't feel like the rest. He didn't have any luck. And now he's identifying himself as that. So he's not going to have any luck, is he? If he's identifying. Does he get that? I mean, they're obviously intelligent.
Oh, he's really
articulate
smart.
guys.
Really articulate guy. He was interesting, actually, because I had the conversation with him, and then a few months passed and I had a follow-up conversation. And it was the first time when he spoke to me originally that he'd ever spoken about it out loud to anybody who wasn't just on the forums and via text. And he shared with me, and it's in the documentary, that and I was really shocked by it. So he's in his early 30s, and he said to me, if he's still in the same situation in his 40s, he would take his own life because there's no point in living. I was very shocked by that. So when I spoke to him again, I sort of revisited that idea. And he sort of had changed a lot. And he said talking out loud in a non-judgmental space had genuinely really helped him. And he was sort of reflecting on it more since and wasn't feeling the same.
He wasn't feeling as assured of his position when he spoke about it to another human being. That
like maybe there will be a bit of hope in the future. Maybe there'll be other things in life. But then what was really interesting, he said, you know, he should never say never when it comes to a relationship, which might sound small, but that is a huge leap from where he was. And that was just one conversation.
That's enough to chuck them out of the community, probably, is it?
Yeah, I think probably.
Certainly for the hardcore element of it, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it just shows like engagement in the real world and not going online to try and solve your problems would probably help with a lot of this kind of thing.
And I suppose broadening your horizons with people who have a different thought process than you. The language around it, you mentioned Stacey's and Chad's. What's the Stacey thing? That's an American kind of a classic sort of cheerleader type girl, is it? Yeah.
It's a pejorative word for a woman that's, really vapid and vain, only interested in sex and money.
And
but they kind of believe all women are that.
Okay, and the Chad again is the kind of the baseball captain type.
Yeah, the alpha male who gets all the women. Yeah.
But that language has filtered down and it's used here as well within the community. And you mentioned to me the hope, cope and rope, and we'll just describe that.
So often you could categorize incels usually in 3 categories. The hope category, they're kind of the guys who have some sense of hope that maybe while they believe in the worldview of the way things are for incels, they maybe think they can improve their chances by what they call looks maxing, which is engaging in different practices to improve your looks. So that's those guys. Then there's cope, who are just sort of accepting the way it is, and that's it, you just get on with it. And then rope, unfortunately, alludes to suicide. So they think that's sort of an option there.
Right.
Yeah.
And do they use that language to one another and would ask one another what of the 3 elements perhaps are they, or?
I don't think they wouldn't. I don't think they'd categorize themselves cleanly in those boxes.
Right.
They're sort of, if you're looking at it objectively, they are kind of the 3 things that keep cropping up over and over.
And what's Chad fishing?
Child fishing is a very strange activity where some incels will go on dating profiles or dating apps and sort of catfish people. So they'll use pictures of male models, the classic alpha male, big muscles in a car, flashy car or something, and pretend to be these guys. But then what they'll do is do something that you would imagine would turn women off, which is perhaps Photoshop a swastika tattoo on the bicep or something like that. And then if any woman engages positively, it's sort of used as proof that women only care about looks. They'll also sometimes as well just engage as themselves and be just themselves, chatty, normal, and the woman's really engaging. And they sort of believe, so she likes my personality. The reason why they don't like me in real life is because I don't look like him. It's nothing about personality. That's a lie that we're being sold.
Right.
Yeah.
It's very basic thinking.
Yeah.
So where did the Tate brothers fit with all this and that sort of toxic masculinity stuff?
It's really hard to know because it's such a messy online world and everything overlaps. I think where it might have some link is in the group of incels who perhaps would put themselves in that hope category. They're looks maxing, they're trying to improve everything about themselves to be what they think the world wants. And I suppose Andrew Tate would be someone who really puts across that idea of, having the big muscles, having the big cars, having loads of money. These are the things women want. These are the really basic gender stereotypes that the world is built on, and that's the way it should be. I suppose that sort of thinking would align a little bit there.
And I suppose finally, like, how dangerous are these groups, and is this thinking, how dangerous is it? Do you think, having sort of dipped in and spoken to these people and seen the kind of stuff they're talking about?
I think 2 things about it. I think in one way, it is extremely dangerous that this sort of misogynistic, violent content is being consumed, particularly by young people who mightn't have the ability to look at it in any kind of nuanced way and take everything quite literally. That is extremely worrying that there's a growing presence of that online for young men to engage with. I think that's a real risk. I interviewed a guard in the documentary who did arrest a man who identified as an incel who was trying to coerce a young girl away to the woods. We don't know what would have happened there, but that's deeply concerning, and that is in Ireland. It's not an American problem. I think, having said that, there also really is a group here of sad, really lonely, disconnected men. So I think there needs to be some kind of balance where we can create a space for men to be able to genuinely talk about some of these things out loud, the way I did to Paul, to sort of move forward more positively, while also really understanding how dangerous the risks of that type of content is and not in any way excusing it. I think that's a difficult balance, but I think that's where we need to get to somehow.
You did a very difficult balance yourself when you making Invisible Men Ireland's Incels, because of course you don't have voices to the table apart from an academic or certainly one academic from Ireland, but it's difficult to get people to talk. So you have to use AI and you have to, change their voices and all the rest of it. But in a way, you kind of became a personality yourself in the documentary.
Yeah.
Your own kind of investigation into it brought everybody with you. So congratulations on that. And it's a great documentary. So it's available on RTE and on all podcast forums. Invisible Men, Ireland's Incels. It's part of the RTE Doc on One series. Thank you, Alan Bradley.
Thank you.